Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Mississippi. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We are interested to know to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1903, the once prestigious Thornhill Plantation outside Natchez, Mississippi, stood in silent decay, its white columns graying against the humid southern sky. The plantation's history stretched back to the early 1800s, but what happened within its walls that October would forever cast a shadow over the property and the family name. A name that, according to county records, was deliberately struck from local society registries by 1905. The Thornhill name had once commanded respect throughout Adams County. Tax records from 1837 show that the plantation was established by Jeremiah Thornhill, who arrived from Virginia with considerable wealth and a reputation for being exceedingly private about his family affairs. The original property encompassed over 200 acres of fertile land along the Mississippi River, though by 1903 much of this had been sold off, leaving only the main house and surrounding 40 acres. What remained was still impressive: a Greek Revival mansion with 6 towering columns, a formal garden that had once been the envy of local society, and an unusual family cemetery secluded behind a grove of ancient live oaks. The story begins with Clara Thornhill, the sole surviving heir to the Thornhill fortune, who returned to the family plantation after 15 years of absence. According to the Natchez Examiner's Society pages from September 1903, Clara's return was noted as unexpected and causing considerable stir among those who recalled the unfortunate circumstances of her departure. The newspaper failed to elaborate on these circumstances, an omission that researchers would later find suspiciously common in local records regarding the Thornhill family. Clara was 32 years old when she returned, unmarried and unaccompanied, save for a single steamer trunk. The plantation had been maintained minimally by a caretaker, one Augustus Barnes, whose employment records showed he had been hired by Clara's father, Judge William Thornhill, shortly before his death in 1901. What's peculiar is that, despite the judge's prominent position, his obituary in the Natchez Examiner was remarkably brief, mentioning only that he passed at home after a period of illness. No cause of death was listed, nor were there any details about the funeral arrangements, which was highly unusual for a man of his standing in the community. According to the recollections of Eliza Jenkins, whose grandmother had been a cook at a neighboring plantation, Judge Thornhill had become increasingly reclusive in his final years. My grandmother said the judge stopped attending church or town functions around 1899. Folks would see him occasionally at his window watching the road, like he was expecting someone or afraid of someone coming. This account was recorded in a 1962 oral history collection at the Adams County Historical Society. Jenkins further recalled, "My grandmother said the judge started wearing gloves all the time, even in the heat of summer. When she asked about it, he told her his hands were sensitive to the sun, but once, when he was reaching for something, she saw inside his sleeve. Said his skin looked strange, like it was too thick in some places. She didn't like to talk about it much, said it wasn't right to speak ill of the dead, especially when they were powerful men like Judge Thornhill. The plantation itself was substantial. Tax records from 1898 list the main house, 3 outbuildings, a carriage house, and approximately 40 acres of land that had once been used for cotton production, but had since been left to grow wild. What's notable is that the property contained an unusual feature for a plantation of its size: a private family cemetery, enclosed by a wrought iron fence, situated in a grove of live oaks beyond the formal gardens. According to county land records, this cemetery was established in 1842, following the death of Jeremiah Thornhill's wife, Elizabeth. What's unusual is that Jeremiah specifically stipulated in a deed addendum that the cemetery grounds were to be maintained in perpetuity according to specific conditions, including the requirement that no non-family member shall be interred within the boundaries, and no earth from within shall be removed from the premises. The document further specified unusual soil amendments to be added annually, though the precise nature of these amendments was never detailed in public records. Local historian Margaret Wilkins, in her 1958 study of antebellum Natchez properties, noted, "The Thornhill Cemetery was unique in several respects, not least in its location. Most plantation burial grounds were positioned on high ground for practical reasons, yet the Thornhill plot was deliberately placed in a low-lying area with poor drainage. Additionally, the family imported specific varieties of plants to surround the cemetery, species not commonly found in Mississippi gardens of the period. Several of these plants are known for their unusual soil requirements and toxic properties." When Clara returned in 1903, according to the account of Augustus Barnes given to the sheriff in November of that year, she arrived with specific instructions. Miss Clara came back changed, Barnes stated in his testimony. She gave orders that no one was to enter the east wing of the house under any circumstances. She had me nail shut the connecting door, said it was for structural concerns, but the timber was sound as the day it was cut. Barnes, who had been caretaker of the property for nearly 3 years by then, further noted that the east wing had been the judge's private domain during his final years. The judge wouldn't allow cleaning staff in there after 1900, Barnes reported. Said he needed absolute privacy for his legal work. Sometimes I'd hear him moving furniture around at odd hours, and once or twice I thought I heard him talking to someone, though he never received visitors that I saw. Barnes also reported that Clara immediately requested access to her father's study, where she remained for 3 days, emerging only for brief meals. During this time, she reportedly had Barnes bring her all of her father's personal correspondence, ledgers, and journals. What she discovered in those pages would never be publicly revealed, but according to Barnes, after the 3rd day I heard breaking glass. Found her burning papers in the fireplace, though it was warm out. Her hands were covered in ink, and she wouldn't meet my eye. When questioned about what documents Clara might have been destroying, Barnes could only say, "The judge kept meticulous records of everything, had ledgers going back decades, family accounts, correspondence with relatives back east, medical journals. He was particular about keeping track of the family health, said it was a responsibility passed down from his father and grandfather." This reference to family health would later prove significant. According to a partial medical record discovered in 1959 during the renovation of the office of Dr. James Harrison, who had been the Thornhill family physician until his death in 1898, Judge William Thornhill had consulted him numerous times regarding what was described only as the family condition. The record, dated May 1897, contains this cryptic notation: Judge T consulted regarding progression of family condition. Symptoms advancing as expected for his age, 54. Recommended continued documentation and correspondence with specialists in Boston. Patient expressed concern regarding possible inheritance by daughter, C. Requested information on latest research regarding hereditary transmission. Advised that current medical understanding remains limited. What makes this case particularly unsettling is the methodical nature of Clara's subsequent actions. According to receipts found in the Thornhill accounts, she made several purchases in the weeks following her arrival. Unusual quantities of lime, new locks for multiple doors, and, curiously, several books on chemistry and soil composition from a bookseller in New Orleans. The receipt, dated October 3, 1903, bears a note in the margin. Customer insisted on discretion. Clara also ordered specialized equipment from a scientific supply company in Baltimore. The invoice, preserved in county records attached to the later investigation, listed items including a high-quality microscope, glass slides and cover slips, specimen jars with hermetic seals, and various chemicals including formaldehyde and ethanol. The shipping label was addressed to Dr. C. Thornhill, suggesting that Clara had either misrepresented her credentials or possessed medical training that was not widely known. During October of that year, Clara was observed making regular trips to the family cemetery. Mary Wilson, whose property bordered the Thornhill estate, reported in a letter to her sister, discovered in 1958 during the renovation of the Wilson home. The Thornhill girl is a strange one, spends hours by those graves, but doesn't seem to be mourning, more like she's inspecting them. Yesterday I saw her with measuring tools, as if she were surveying the plots. Who measures graves? Wilson's letter continued. She's been taking samples of the soil, too, has little glass vials that she fills and labels. Once she saw me watching from my porch and gave me the coldest look imaginable. Later, sent over a note asking that I respect the privacy of her scientific work. Scientific, she calls it. There's something unnatural about a woman poking around in cemetery dirt, scientific or not. According to Barnes, Clara had established what she called a laboratory in one of the upstairs rooms of the main house. She had all manner of equipment shipped in, he stated. Glass tubes and bottles, a microscope, books, stacked everywhere. Had me bring up a heavy table from the dining room. Said she needed a sturdy surface for her work. Kept the door locked when she wasn't in there. I could hear her moving around at all hours, muttering to herself. Barnes also reported that Clara made several inquiries about her father's final illness. She wanted to know every detail, when the symptoms started, how they progressed, who had attended him at the end, asked if he'd said anything unusual in his final days. I told her he'd been mostly silent toward the end, except for once when he woke suddenly and said, "It's further along than I thought. You'll have to know eventually." I assumed he meant Miss Clara, but I couldn't be certain. What we know with certainty is that on October 28, 1903, Clara sent a telegram to a Dr. Richard Holloway in Boston, where she had resided during her absence from Natchez. The telegram, preserved in the Holloway family papers, donated to Harvard University in 1943, contained only this cryptic message: "Suspicions confirmed. Father's condition, as you feared. Must proceed with utmost caution. Require specialized equipment as discussed. Utmost discretion essential." Dr. Holloway's response, sent the following day, was equally vague. Proceeding with arrangements, arriving November 15th with necessary implements. Scientific documentation essential. Have secured private funding for further research. Maintain distance from the matter until then. This reference to private funding raises questions about what exactly Dr. Holloway and Clara were planning to investigate and who might have been interested in financing their research. According to records at Massachusetts General Hospital, where Holloway had worked until 1899, he had been involved in research regarding rare hereditary conditions, with a particular focus on what medical literature of the time referred to as progressive tissue anomalies, conditions in which the body's tissues developed abnormally over time. A paper published by Holloway in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1898, Volume 139, number 4, discussed familial patterns of progressive cellular reorganization, though the specifics of his research were obscured by the limited scientific vocabulary of the era. What's notable is that the paper mentioned a Southern family of considerable standing, whose male line had exhibited consistent symptoms across 4 generations. While the family was not named, the timing and description suggest it may have been the Thornhills. Here the record grows increasingly peculiar. According to the ledger at Patterson's General Store in Natchez, Clara purchased an unusual combination of items during the first week of November: 6 large glass jars with airtight seals, 20 yards of heavy canvas, a set of surgical-grade scissors, and what is listed as spec equipment, Boston, which had apparently been shipped to the store for her collection. The store owner, Thomas Patterson, later told investigators that Clara had changed noticeably since her return to Natchez. She wasn't the same girl who left, he stated. Used to be lively, always had a smile for everyone. Now she had this intensity about her, focused, like she was working out a complex problem in her head even while talking to you. Asked me strange questions, too. Wanted to know if I'd noticed anything unusual about the soil around the Thornhill property, if crops grew differently there. Said she was conducting agricultural research. Augustus Barnes would later tell the sheriff that Clara's behavior grew increasingly erratic during this period. She stopped sleeping regular hours. I'd hear her pacing the upper floors at night. During the day, she'd spend hours in the library with old family albums, marking pages with bits of colored thread. One morning, I found her at the kitchen table with all the family silver spread out before her, examining each piece with a magnifying glass. When I asked if she was looking for something, she said, "Evidence doesn't announce itself, Mr. Barnes. It hides in plain sight." Barnes also reported finding strange notations in Clara's handwriting around the house. Numbers and symbols on scraps of paper tucked into books or behind picture frames. They looked like calculations of some kind, he stated. Dates with numbers beside them, going back generations. Family birth and death dates, I realized eventually, with notations about age and something labeled progression rate. Perhaps most disturbing was Clara's sudden interest in the structural details of the house itself. According to Barnes, she requested the original architectural plans, which her father had kept in his study. When Barnes informed her they couldn't be located, she reportedly became agitated and began tapping on walls throughout the east wing, measuring distances between rooms and examining the floorboards in certain areas with unusual attention. She became fixated on a particular section of flooring in what had been her mother's sitting room, Barnes stated. Kept returning to it, putting her ear to the boards. Asked me if I'd ever noticed sounds coming from beneath the house. I told her all old houses settle and creak, but she just gave me this look and said, "What if it isn't the house making those sounds, Mr. Barnes?" Clara also inquired about any structural changes that had been made to the house over the years, particularly in the east wing. According to Barnes, she seemed especially interested in renovations that had been undertaken in 1874, following the death of her grandfather, Ephraim Thornhill. She found an old journal of her grandfather's, Barnes reported. After reading it, she started examining the walls in the east wing with extra attention. Asked me if I knew anything about a room that might have been sealed off during renovations. Said her grandfather's journal mentioned a containment space that had been constructed for family necessities. On November 10th, 5 days before Dr. Holloway's expected arrival, something happened that would dramatically accelerate events. According to Barnes's testimony, he was awakened in the middle of the night by what he described as a terrible commotion from the east wing, the wing Clara had specifically prohibited anyone from entering. There was crashing, like furniture being overturned, Barnes recalled. Then Miss Clara screamed, not in fear, mind you, but in what sounded like triumph. "Here!" she kept shouting. "Here it is." When Barnes attempted to investigate, he found that Clara had not only unlocked the connecting door to the east wing, but had removed it from its hinges entirely. Inside what had once been her mother's sitting room, he discovered Clara kneeling beside a section of removed floorboards, a lantern positioned to illuminate what appeared to be a small recess beneath the floor. According to Barnes, Clara was in a state of intense excitement, her normally composed demeanor entirely abandoned. She looked up at me with her eyes wide, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, and said, "My father was very thorough, Mr. Barnes, but not thorough enough. He didn't count on me inheriting his particular attention to detail." What Clara had discovered beneath the floorboards was never explicitly stated in any official record. Barnes would only say that there was a box of some kind, and that Clara immediately ordered him to leave and to stay away from the east wing. He reported that she worked through the night and that he could hear the sound of hammering and what might have been digging coming from the room until dawn. Barnes later admitted to listening at the door at one point and hearing Clara talking, apparently to herself. She kept saying things like, "The progression is further than I thought," and "the structure has completely changed." Then she laughed, not a normal laugh, but something high and strange, and said, "Father, you've outdone yourself this time." The next day, Clara sent an urgent telegram to Dr. Holloway, which read simply, "Discovery made. Situation worse than anticipated. Come immediately. Bring all necessary equipment for complete extraction and documentation. Dr." Holloway apparently responded with unprecedented haste, arriving in Natchez not on the 15th as planned, but on November 12th, a mere 2 days after Clara's discovery. He brought with him several large trunks of equipment, the contents of which were never inventoried in any surviving record. According to the register at the Natchez Hotel, Dr. Richard Holloway was a physician specializing in research pathology at Massachusetts General Hospital. The hospital confirmed his employment until 1899, after which he established a private practice specializing in what was vaguely termed hereditary conditions. What's notable is that Holloway's departure from the hospital coincided with the cancellation of a research project he had been heading, a project focusing on what hospital records described only as anomalous tissue studies. According to a brief note in the hospital's administrative records, accessed by medical historians in 1952, the project was terminated due to ethical concerns and methodological irregularities. No further details were provided, and Holloway's subsequent publications became increasingly infrequent and vague in their descriptions. His credentials appeared impeccable, yet inquiries made years later would reveal curious gaps in his professional history. What transpired over the next 3 days at Thornhill Plantation remains largely undocumented. Barnes, who was instructed to remain in the caretaker's cottage and not approach the main house, reported seeing lights moving through the rooms at all hours and hearing what he described as machinery of some kind with a whirring sound operating during the night. On the morning of November 15th, smoke was observed rising from the chimney of the east wing despite the mild temperature. According to Barnes, when he attempted to deliver a message that had arrived for Clara, he was met at the door by Dr. Holloway, whose clothing was stained with what appeared to be soil and other unidentified substances. The doctor refused him entry, stating that he and Clara were in the midst of a delicate procedure that could not be interrupted. Barnes reported that the doctor appeared exhausted, yet exhilarated. His eyes had a fevered look, Barnes stated, and he kept glancing back over his shoulder as if afraid to turn his back on whatever was inside for too long. When I asked if everything was all right, he said, "We are on the cusp of a discovery that will overturn everything we thought we knew about human physiology. The Thornhill case will be remembered for centuries." That same evening, Clara and Dr. Holloway were seen by Mary Wilson, making multiple trips between the house and the family cemetery, carrying what she described as bundles wrapped in canvas. In her letter to her sister, Wilson wrote, "I cannot imagine what business keeps them in that graveyard after sunset. They carried lanterns and what appeared to be tools for digging." The doctor had some manner of case with him like those used by physicians for their instruments. They remained there for hours, and when they returned to the house, their clothing was soiled considerably. Wilson further noted, "What troubles me most is not their activities, strange as they are, but the change in their demeanor over the course of the evening. When they first went to the cemetery, they moved with purpose, speaking to one another animatedly. When they emerged some hours later, they were silent, and there was a rigidity to their movements, as if they were forcing themselves to complete their task, despite some terrible discovery." On November 16th, something occurred that would permanently alter the course of events at Thornhill Plantation. According to the account later given by Sheriff James Whitaker, his office received an urgent message from Augustus Barnes shortly after midnight, reporting disturbing sounds and unusual lights at the Plantation Cemetery. Barnes would later elaborate that he had been awakened by what he described as a rhythmic sound, like digging, but too regular to be natural. When he looked out toward the cemetery, he saw lantern light moving among the graves and shapes that seemed to be dragging something heavy. When Sheriff Whitaker and 2 deputies arrived at approximately 1:30 a.m., they found the cemetery gates standing open and evidence of recent digging at several grave sites. Most disturbing, according to the sheriff's report, was the condition of Judge William Thornhill's grave. The earth had been removed and the casket opened. Inside, we discovered that the remains had been interfered with. Certain portions appeared to have been removed with surgical precision. The report further noted that similar disturbances were evident at two other graves, those of Ephraim Thornhill, Clara's grandfather, d. 1874, and Benjamin Thornhill, Clara's great-uncle, d. 1868. In both cases, the caskets had been opened and the remains examined and partially removed. The sheriff immediately proceeded to the main house, where he found Clara Thornhill and Dr. Holloway in the study, surrounded by what was described as scientific equipment of an unusual nature, and several specimen jars containing what the sheriff would only refer to as biological materials. According to Deputy William Foster's personal journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1921, what they witnessed in that room defied easy description. The doctor had arranged the specimens in a sequence across the large desk, Foster wrote. They appeared to be tissue samples of some kind, preserved in fluid. What was disturbing was not their nature, which was medical in character, but the progression they seemed to represent. The first appeared normal, but each subsequent sample showed increasing degrees of alteration. The final jar contained something that resembled no human tissue I have ever seen or could imagine. When I asked what it was, Miss Thornhill replied, "The culmination of the Thornhill legacy." According to the official report, when confronted, Clara did not deny their activities, but instead attempted to explain them as necessary medical research of a confidential nature. She produced what appeared to be legitimate documentation authorizing the exhumation of her father's remains for scientific study related to hereditary disease, though Sheriff Whitaker noted that the authorization lacked appropriate county seals and signatures. What followed was a confrontation that escalated quickly. Dr. Holloway attempted to assert his medical authority, while Clara reportedly became increasingly agitated when the sheriff suggested seizing their research materials as evidence. Miss Thornhill's manner changed entirely, the sheriff recorded. She became almost frantic in her insistence that their work not be disturbed. When I moved toward one of the specimen jars, she placed herself between me and the desk, saying, "You don't understand what's at stake. This goes beyond my father. This concerns generations. Some inheritances cannot simply be buried and forgotten." Deputy Foster's journal provides additional details. Miss Thornhill spoke at length about a condition that had affected the male line of her family for generations. She claimed it was progressive and heritable, that it caused changes in the body that science could not yet explain. But most disturbing was her assertion that the condition continued to advance even after death, that the tissues continued to evolve, was the word she used. The doctor supported her claims, showing us notes and drawings that purported to demonstrate these changes across generations. When the sheriff insisted on examining their materials, Clara reportedly glanced at Dr. Holloway and said something that was recorded differently by different witnesses. According to Deputy Samuel Taylor, her words were, "They'll never understand what he was," what we found in the bloodline. Deputy William Foster, however, recorded her as saying, "They'll never believe what's been growing in our family." What happened next remains a matter of dispute. According to the sheriff's official report, Dr. Holloway suddenly seized one of the specimen jars and attempted to flee the room. In the ensuing struggle, the jar was dropped and broken, exposing its contents to the air. The sheriff's report describes only biological specimens that presented an immediate health concern, necessitating that the room be sealed. Deputy Foster's account is more specific, though it was never included in official records. The container shattered on impact, releasing both the preservative fluid and its contents. What emerged was unlike anything I have ever seen. A mass of tissue that appeared to move of its own accord for several seconds, pulsing and shifting, as if still alive, despite having been preserved. Dr. Holloway cried out, "Don't touch it!" and Miss Thornhill immediately began attempting to contain it with a cloth. The sheriff ordered an immediate evacuation of the room, which was then locked and sealed. Within hours, the county health officer, Dr. Samuel Patterson, had been summoned, and the decision was made to place Thornhill Plantation under quarantine. Clara and Dr. Holloway were detained separately, he at the county jail, she at the home of the health officer, Dr. Samuel Patterson. The following day, November 17th, Dr. Patterson examined the materials found in the study. His report, later sealed by court order, allegedly contained detailed descriptions of the specimens, though no copies of this report are known to survive. What does survive is a brief note he sent to the sheriff, preserved in the county archives, which reads only, "Have examined materials from Thornhill Estate, contents consistent with advanced stages of hereditary condition, possibly malignant in nature. Recommend immediate containment and restricted access to property." Clara Thornhill was questioned extensively over the next several days, though no formal charges were immediately filed. According to fragmentary notes from these interviews, she maintained that her actions were motivated by scientific necessity and family obligation. She spoke at length about her father's condition in his final years, wrote Dr. Patterson in a letter to a colleague at Tulane Medical School, discovered in 1960 during cataloging of the university's archives. She described progressive symptoms that had apparently afflicted several generations of Thornhills. All was manifesting in middle age. According to Miss Thornhill, her father had corresponded with her about his symptoms for years, documenting changes in his physical condition that became increasingly alarming. This letter contains perhaps the only direct quotation from Clara that was preserved. "I did not desecrate my father's grave. I confirmed what he himself feared. The condition doesn't end with death. It continues. It changes. It adapts. What we observed in his remains proves that the progression continues even after the heart stops beating." Dr. Patterson further noted, "Miss Thornhill's education is more extensive than I had realized. She studied biology at a women's college in Massachusetts and subsequently worked as a research assistant to Dr. Holloway at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her understanding of hereditary pathology is sophisticated, if somewhat unorthodox. She speaks of the Thornhill condition not as a disease to be cured, but as an alternative developmental pathway that has been cultivated within the family line for generations." This reference to cultivation appears again in a personal note Dr. Patterson made on November 18th. Miss T made a disturbing statement today regarding the family cemetery. Claims it was deliberately situated and maintained to provide optimal conditions for development. When pressed on what she meant, she would only say that her grandfather had selected the location based on soil composition and that specific minerals were added regularly to facilitate the process. What process, she would not specify. On November 19th, an unexpected development complicated the investigation. Dr. Holloway, who had been held at the county jail, was found unresponsive in his cell. He was pronounced dead shortly thereafter, with the cause listed as apoplexy. However, Dr. Patterson's examination noted unusual discoloration around the doctor's fingernails and lips, leading to speculation about possible self-poisoning, though this was never confirmed. Deputy Foster's journal contains this observation. The doctor's body exhibited unusual characteristics that disturbed Dr. Patterson considerably. He would not specify what these were, but insisted the body be sealed in a lead-lined coffin immediately and interred in the county cemetery under a layer of lime. No autopsy was performed by order of the health department. With Holloway's death, Clara became the sole source of information about their activities and findings. According to Sheriff Whitaker, she received the news of her colleague's death with unsettling composure, remarking only, "He understood the risks. We both did. Some knowledge comes at a price." Dr. Patterson's notes record that Clara became increasingly withdrawn after Holloway's death. "She speaks little now, but watches constantly," he wrote. "My wife reports that Miss Thornhill spends hours staring at her own hands, examining them as if looking for signs of something. When asked what she is looking for, she replied, 'The beginning. It always starts in the extremities.'" On November 21st, while still under nominal house arrest at Dr. Patterson's residence, Clara requested permission to return to the plantation briefly to collect personal items. Despite reservations, the sheriff allowed this under the supervision of Deputy Taylor. What happened next would become the most contested part of the entire case. According to Deputy Taylor's report, upon arriving at Thornhill Plantation, Clara asked to visit her room to gather clothing. While the deputy waited in the hallway, Clara apparently entered not her bedroom, but the study where their research materials had been stored. Taylor reported hearing glass breaking and rushed into the room to find Clara deliberately destroying the remaining specimen jars and dousing the research papers with what appeared to be kerosene from a lamp. "I attempted to restrain Miss Thornhill," Taylor wrote, "but she fought with unexpected strength. She kept saying, 'It must be destroyed completely. The evidence cannot survive.'" In the struggle that ensued, the kerosene lamp was knocked over, igniting the papers on the desk. The fire spread with alarming speed, engulfing the study and quickly moving to adjacent rooms. Deputy Taylor stated that he attempted to pull Clara from the burning room, but she broke free of his grasp and ran deeper into the house, toward the east wing. By the time additional help arrived, the main house was fully engulfed in flames, making rescue attempts impossible. Taylor later recalled Clara's final words to him as she pulled away. "This ends with me. The Thornhill legacy stops here. Better to burn than to become what they became." The fire burned for hours, reducing Thornhill Plantation to ruins. When the remains were searched the following day, human remains presumed to be those of Clara Thornhill were discovered in what had been the east wing, specifically in the area beneath the floor where she had made her discovery days earlier. The official cause of death was recorded as death by misadventure, and the case was formally closed on December 3, 1903. The property was cordoned off and eventually sold at auction to satisfy outstanding debts against the estate. Dr. Patterson, who had examined both the specimens from the Thornhill study and Clara's discovery beneath the floorboards, though no record of the latter examination exists in official documents, submitted his resignation as county health officer in January 1904 and relocated to New Orleans. In a brief letter to his successor, he wrote only, "Regarding the Thornhill matter, some files have been permanently sealed by my authority. I recommend they remain so. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve, some conditions too unnatural to study." But the story of Clara Thornhill and the secrets of the plantation did not end with the fire. In the decades that followed, unusual reports began to emerge regarding the abandoned property. In 1907, a survey team assessing the land for potential development reported abnormal soil conditions around the former family cemetery. According to their notes, the earth appeared unusually rich and vegetation grew with unnatural vigor in certain areas, particularly around the disturbed grave sites. Team leader James Carpenter wrote in his report, "The soil composition defies conventional analysis. Samples contain mineral concentrations unlike anything in surrounding areas, suggesting deliberate augmentation over many years. More disturbing is the behavior of the vegetation. Species that typically compete are growing in strange harmony, and several plants exhibit structural abnormalities with unusual tissue formations that our botanist cannot identify. We recommend against agricultural development of this land." In 1912, when attempts were made to clear the property for agricultural use, workers uncovered what were described as anomalous remains near the foundation of the east wing. County health officials were called and the discoveries were quickly reburied. No formal report was filed, but a notation in the county health department ledger indicated that the remains were inconsistent with normal human anatomy and recommended the area remain undeveloped. According to the private journal of Henry Wilson, Mary Wilson's son, who had inherited the neighboring property, the workers refused to return to the Thornhill land. They speak of finding something beneath the ruins that was neither human nor animal, but seemed to be composed of both, somehow fused together. The county doctor had everything buried again immediately and ordered the men to speak to no one about what they had seen. Leland, who was among them, told me in confidence that whatever they found appeared to still be growing, despite having been buried in the fire 15 years earlier. In 1919, a geological survey conducted by the state noted magnetic anomalies throughout the former Thornhill property that could not be explained by known mineral deposits. The report concluded that the land was unsuitable for development due to unidentified subsoil conditions that might pose health hazards. Perhaps most disturbing was a discovery made in 1928, when the adjacent Wilson property changed hands. The new owners, while renovating an old storage shed, found a sealed mason jar hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside was what appeared to be a journal, water-damaged but partially legible, bearing the name Clara Thornhill. The journal was turned over to local authorities and subsequently transferred to state officials for evaluation. According to correspondence between the Adams County Sheriff and the Mississippi Department of Public Health, archived in Jackson, the journal contained disturbing observations regarding a condition that had apparently affected the Thornhill family for generations. Only fragments of this journal's contents have ever been made public. One passage, quoted in a 1931 internal memorandum from the Department of Public Health, reads, "Father's condition progressed as expected. The changes began in the extremities, just as they did with grandfather, then moved inward. What's remarkable is how the tissue adapts, how it seems almost to develop a separate purpose, a separate hunger. The family trait, as he called it, isn't simply a disease. It's an evolution of some kind, but toward what end? And why does it accelerate after death?" Another fragment, quoted in the same memorandum, states, "Dr. H. confirms my suspicions about the soil composition in the family cemetery. The unusual mineral content appears to accelerate the changes. Father selected the location deliberately, knowing what would happen to the remains over time. He wasn't trying to hide the condition. He was cultivating it." A third passage, perhaps most disturbing, reads, "I've examined the family records going back to Jeremiah. Every male in the direct line exhibited the same progression beginning around age 40. What starts in the hands and feet gradually moves inward, changing everything it touches. Grandfather's journals detail how his father, in the final stages, seemed to be becoming something else. He writes of tissue that was neither fully human nor separate from the human. Is this why the family was so insistent on private burials, not out of grief or tradition, but containment? The journal contains numerous technical observations that suggest Clara had been systematically studying the condition for years, possibly during her entire absence from Natchez. She refers repeatedly to tissue samples and progression rates across generations, noting that each subsequent generation showed signs of the condition earlier in life and with more pronounced manifestations. Perhaps most chilling is a passage dated November 11, 1903, presumably written after her discovery beneath the floorboards. "What I found confirms my worst fears. Father didn't die of the condition, he transformed. What lies beneath the boards isn't dead tissue. It's still changing, still growing, even after 2 years. The structure is unlike anything in medical literature, not human, not plant, not fungal, but somehow incorporating elements of all three. And it responds to stimuli. When I touched it with a probe, it moved toward the contact. It's aware and hungry." The journal was reportedly sealed by state order in 1932 and transferred to federal authorities. Its current whereabouts remain unknown, though rumors persist that it was sent to a specialized research facility for study. In 1934, a brief but unusual item appeared in the Natchez Examiner. Federal authorities conducted an unspecified operation on the former Thornhill property yesterday. Local residents report seeing men in protective clothing removing several large containers from the area where the family cemetery was once located. No explanation was provided, and the property has now been fenced and posted with no trespassing signs by order of the U.S. Public Health Service. The land where Thornhill Plantation once stood remains undeveloped to this day. Local residents report that vegetation grows strangely there, too lush, too vibrant compared to surrounding areas. Nothing edible is grown on the property by unspoken agreement among neighboring farmers. In 1958, during a particularly dry summer, an unusual depression formed in the ground where the family cemetery had been, revealing what appeared to be a network of root-like structures beneath the soil. County officials quickly filled the depression and restricted access to the area. According to Elijah Wilson, grandson of Mary Wilson, who witnessed the depression before it was filled, it wasn't like normal roots. They were too thick, too purposeful in their arrangement. They formed a pattern, almost like a circulatory system connecting all the grave sites. And there was something about the color, not the brown of normal roots, but a pale, almost flesh-like tone. When the sunlight hit them, they seemed to pulse just slightly, like they were breathing. A geological survey conducted in 1964 noted unusual soil composition throughout the former Thornhill property, with abnormally high concentrations of certain minerals and organic compounds that the surveyors were unable to identify with their equipment. The report recommended against residential development of the area, citing potential health concerns related to soil quality. Dr. Martin Reynolds, who conducted the survey, later wrote to a colleague at the University of Mississippi, "The soil samples from the Thornhill property defy conventional analysis. They contain organic structures that appear to be neither plant nor animal in origin, yet exhibit characteristics of both. Most disturbing is their response to laboratory conditions. The samples appear to be actively adapting to their environment, restructuring their cellular composition in ways I cannot explain. I've secured the samples in sealed containers and am arranging for their transfer to a better equipped facility." In 1965, an elderly woman named Margaret Holloway contacted the Adams County Historical Society, claiming to be the niece of Dr. Richard Holloway. According to her statement recorded by the Society's director, her uncle had left a sealed envelope with instructions that it be opened 30 years after his death. The envelope contained a letter and several photographs, the director's notes record. Ms. Holloway was reluctant to share the actual contents, but said they pertained to her uncle's work with the Thornhill family. She indicated that the letter warned against any further investigation of the family condition, describing it as neither disease nor evolution, but something outside the natural order entirely. When I asked to see the photographs, she refused, saying her uncle had instructed that they be destroyed after she had read his warning. The last official investigation into the Thornhill case occurred in 1967, when construction of a new highway prompted a re-examination of land records in the area. During this process, a clerk discovered a sealed envelope in the county archives labeled simply Thornhill, Final Observations, 1903. The envelope contained a single page, apparently torn from Dr. Patterson's personal notes, which had never been included in any official report. The page, now preserved in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, contains this chilling passage. "Having examined the specimens obtained from Judge Thornhill's remains, I am forced to consider possibilities that defy conventional medical understanding. The tissue shows evidence of unprecedented cellular reorganization, as if the very structure of the human body had begun to transform itself according to some alternative blueprint. What Miss Thornhill referred to as the family trait appears to be some manner of biological anomaly passed through generations, becoming more pronounced with each successive manifestation. Most disturbing is the evidence suggesting that this condition continues to progress after death, albeit along different pathways. The implications are profound and troubling. If Miss Thornhill's research is accurate, the Thornhill bloodline has been incubating something that is neither disease nor normal human development, but something altogether different, a systematic reformation of human tissue toward an end I cannot begin to fathom. I have recommended the permanent sealing of all materials related to this case, not out of scientific caution, but out of genuine concern for public welfare. Some knowledge once obtained cannot be contained. Like the condition it documents, it spreads, it influences, it transforms. The Thornhill family's legacy is one that should remain buried, both literally and within our records. The document bears an additional notation, added in a different hand, and dated 1932, related materials transferred to federal custody under Section 22A protocols. Site to remain under observation indefinitely. In 1968, during an unusually heavy rainstorm, part of the old access road to Thornhill Plantation collapsed, revealing what appeared to be a previously unknown underground structure. County officials arrived quickly and sealed off the area before any detailed examination could be conducted by local residents. Harold Jenkins, whose farm adjoined the property, reported seeing men in official-looking uniforms removing objects from the revealed structure before it was filled in with concrete. They were careful, Jenkins stated in an interview for the local paper. Used special containers, sealed everything tight. One of them dropped something, looked like a glass slide, and they treated it like it was dangerous. Had a special team come in just to clean up that tiny piece of glass. Made me wonder what they were really dealing with out there. In 1968, a researcher from Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Elizabeth Crane, attempted to access records related to the Thornhill case for a study on unusual hereditary conditions in isolated populations. Her request was denied by multiple agencies, and she reportedly received a personal visit from a federal official advising her to discontinue her inquiries. In a letter to a colleague, Dr. Muffam, Crane wrote, "The response to my simple academic inquiry was disproportionate and concerning. Why would a century-old medical case warrant such secrecy?" The official suggested that some historical medical records remain classified due to ongoing public health considerations. When I pressed for clarification, he would only say that some conditions are better left unstudied. The impression I received was that whatever affected the Thornhill family might still be of concern today. Today, the former Thornhill property stands empty, marked only by a simple historical marker noting that a plantation once stood on the site. Local residents still avoid the area, particularly after dark. Some claim to have seen unusual growth patterns in the vegetation, plants that seem to move without wind, that grow too quickly, too purposefully. Others report a persistent smell around the former cemetery, not of decay but of something alive and growing, something that doesn't belong in the natural order of things. In 1994, a botany student from the University of Mississippi collected plant samples from the area as part of a study on invasive species. According to her field notes, later removed from university archives but quoted in a fellow student's thesis, the plants exhibited unprecedented hybridization between normally incompatible species and cellular structures that appear to incorporate animal cell characteristics, including what might be interpreted as rudimentary nervous tissue. The student abandoned her research shortly thereafter, leaving the university entirely. When contacted by her former advisor, she reportedly said only, "Some things aren't meant to be studied. Some growth should be left uncatalogued." In 2001, during road expansion near the property, workers reported finding strange root structures that, when cut, exuded a fluid more like blood than sap. Work was halted temporarily, and when it resumed, the route had been slightly altered to avoid the area entirely. What Clara Thornhill discovered beneath her family home in 1903, what she confirmed in her father's grave, and what she ultimately chose to destroy rather than allow to be studied, these questions remain unanswered. Perhaps, as Dr. Patterson suggested, some inheritances are best left buried, some family traits best forgotten, but the land remembers. The soil, enriched by generations of Thornhills, continues its slow, patient work. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, locals swear they can hear sounds coming from the overgrown acreage where the plantation once stood, not the settling of old timber or the natural sounds of the forest, but something deliberate, something that sounds almost like digging. Longtime resident Thomas Wilson, whose family has owned the neighboring property for generations, put it this way in a 2005 interview with a local historian. "There's something alive on that land that shouldn't be alive." My grandfather told me that when he was a boy, his mother, she would have been Mary Wilson from the original accounts, told him never to play near the Thornhill property, said the ground there was hungry. As a child, I didn't understand what she meant. Now I think I do. The land there doesn't just grow things, it changes them. Whatever the Thornhills put into that soil, whatever they put into themselves, it's still there, still working, still hungry. Another local resident, Sarah Jenkins, whose family has lived in the area since before the Civil War, shared this observation. There's a reason nobody's developed that land in over a century. It's not just the rumors or the stories. It's something you feel when you get close to it, a wrongness that raises the hair on your arms. The plants grow too well there, too fast, but they're not right. My father used to say that the Thornhills didn't just live on that land, they became part of it. And whatever was in their blood is now in the soil itself. In 2008, a series of unusually heavy rains led to flooding in parts of Adams County, including the former Thornhill property. In the aftermath, county environmental officials conducted routine testing of water samples from the area. The results of these tests were never made public, but an anonymous source within the department later claimed that the samples contained biological anomalies that prompted further investigation by state officials. According to this source, whatever's in that soil entered the groundwater during the floods. The samples contained cellular structures that shouldn't exist, hybrid forms that incorporate characteristics of plant, animal, and fungal cells in ways that violate basic biological principles. The official report called them unidentified environmental contaminants, but privately, the scientists were using words like unprecedented and impossible. As one elderly resident whose grandmother had worked at a neighboring plantation put it in an interview for the Adams County Historical Society's Oral History Project in 1964, the Thornhills didn't just build on that land, they became part of it. And whatever was in their blood, it's still there, still growing, still waiting. In 1966, the last known relative of the Thornhill family, a distant cousin living in Boston, was approached by researchers interested in the family's medical history. According to reports, she refused to discuss the matter, saying only, "Some family traits are best left unexplored." Clara understood that in the end. That's why she did what she did. The woman, whose name was redacted from the records, reportedly added, "My grandmother told me about the Thornhill men, how they changed as they aged. She said toward the end they weren't fully themselves anymore, that something else was growing inside them, taking over. She warned me to never have my own DNA tested, to never let doctors study our blood too closely. Some things," she told me, "aren't meant to be under a microscope. Some things grow stronger when they're observed." In 2010, a developer attempting to purchase the land for a planned residential community was denied permits by county officials, despite offering significantly above market value. According to public records of the county commission meeting, the decision was influenced by a confidential environmental assessment that deemed the land unsuitable for residential development due to persistent contamination of undetermined origin. Commission member Robert Taylor, whose family had lived in the area for generations, was quoted as saying, "Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. The Thornhill property is one of them. What's in that soil should stay there, contained and forgotten." In 2014, a graduate student in environmental science from Louisiana State University attempted to conduct soil studies on the property as part of her dissertation on historical contamination at former plantation sites. Her request for access was denied by multiple agencies. In her published dissertation, she included this footnote: "Attempts to sample the Thornhill site were unsuccessful due to unexplained restrictions. Informal conversations with local officials suggest the presence of contaminants related to unknown medical research conducted in the early 1900s, possibly involving experimental treatments or unidentified biological materials." The case of Clara Thornhill remains officially closed, classified as a tragic accident arising from mental instability. But for those few who have studied the fragmentary evidence, the partial journal, Dr. Patterson's hidden notes, the curious geological anomalies, the question remains, what exactly did the Thornhill family inherit, generation after generation? What grew beneath the floorboards of that plantation house in the private family cemetery, and perhaps most disturbingly, in their very blood? And what continues to grow there still in that undeveloped patch of Mississippi soil, feeding on an inheritance that Clara Thornhill tried and failed to keep buried? Perhaps most troubling of all is a recent observation made by Dr. James Whittaker, great-grandson of Sheriff James Whittaker, who has maintained an unofficial interest in the case throughout his career as a pathologist. Modern science gives us new ways of understanding what might have affected the Thornhill family. There are conditions now being studied, prion diseases, aggressive cancers with the ability to adapt and evolve, even parasitic organisms that can influence host behavior, that might explain some aspects of what was observed. But none of them fully account for the reports of continued activity after death, of tissue that remained viable and continued to change years after separation from the body. Whatever affected the Thornhills might represent a biological phenomenon outside our current understanding, not supernatural, but perhaps an extreme example of how human biology can be altered by specific environmental factors over generations. The deliberate cultivation Clara mentioned in her journal suggests the family may have been aware of these changes and, for reasons we cannot fathom, sought to enhance rather than prevent them. In his private notes, never published but shared with a few trusted colleagues, Dr. Whittaker added, "What terrifies me is not the possibility that the Thornhill condition was some unknown disease, but that it might have been a different kind of biological possibility altogether, a divergent evolutionary pathway that, under the right conditions, might have continued beyond what we recognize as human." Clara Thornhill didn't just fear her family's legacy, she feared what it might become if allowed to continue its progression unhindered. And that perhaps is why she chose fire as her final solution. The land remains empty, the story officially concluded, the records largely sealed. But sometimes when the moon is dark and the night is still, something moves in the soil where the Thornhills once lived and died, and perhaps continue to change, something that grows and waits and remembers what it was, and what it might still become.